All right, well, let's talk more now about pensions and about carbon pricing with our Friday journalist panel. And we do have three Ottawa bureau chiefs joining us today. Bob Fife of the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles of the Toronto Star, and Joanna Smith of the Canadian Press. Welcome to all three of you.
Thanks for having us.
Tonda, let me start with you and what we heard today from the Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, after her meeting with her provincial and territorial counterparts on Alberta's potential exit from the Canada Pension Plan and how the numbers might add up. What stands out for you here?
What stood out for me was that we actually didn't get anything substantive on this debate, but still, at least, you know, they met, they talked. On this one, Alberta might be on its own. There aren't a lot of other premiers that are taking its side in that it's making the argument that it deserves to get out with 53% of the massive Canada Pension Fund. But fundamentally, this argument will all come down to what Ottawa finally calculates as what Alberta would be entitled to and how ridiculous it would be for the entire pension fund. This is a solid fund that has done really well for Canadians, and then the politics will unfold from there.
So, Joanna, I guess it really is just the case now of waiting for these numbers and possibly competing numbers. And we have heard Alberta Premier Danielle Smith float the idea that this could end up in court. What are you going to be watching for now that this meeting's happened?
Well, first of all, we also heard her kind of unfloat the idea of holding a referendum, right? Like that sort of seems in doubt a little bit more. It wouldn't come until after consultations maybe. So I think she's given herself a different kind of exit strategy there, perhaps. But it really is also a case of follow the money. You can talk about provinces wanting more independence, wanting more fair share, but if it means the rest of the provinces will be left with less than half of what's there, they're not going to be okay with that.
Okay, Bob, I want to turn to carbon pricing. We know that finance ministers did want to ask Chrystia Freeland about that today in those talks, and it really caps off a week where we have seen the Trudeau government really under attack. From not just from opposition parties, but from Conservative premiers, from NDP
Liberals,
provincial parties, and from Liberals as well. I do want to talk about that side of it as well. But what are your impressions of how you've seen this political debate unfolding this week since that announcement, which occurred 1 week ago?
Well, you know, what it shows is that the government is in panic mode. It's actually an indication that you've got a tired government that hasn't thought through the implications of what they did with this carbon reversal. When you are seeing, you know, they've caved to a very important voting bloc in Atlantic Canada, but it's had repercussions all across the country, and everybody's saying, well, what about me? Well, how come I can't get this for natural gas, or how come I'm not entitled to a heat pump? You have the Western premiers in particular saying, you know, this is a real indication here that this government it does not govern in the interests of the country as a whole, but is using it. It's playing politics for electoral reasons here, and then you're seeing very important members of the Liberal Party, including Catherine McKenna, who is the first environment minister, and one who's highly respected in the Liberal Party and amongst environmentalists, saying that, you know, you got to reverse this move. This is really bad when you're taking the carbon tax off of home heating oil, which is the biggest polluter there is. And you have a potential leadership candidate such as Mark Carney saying, hey, this isn't going very well. So this has not been a great week for the Liberals, and this is not going to get better for them. They've miscalculated, it's blown up in their face, and I don't see how they're going to get out of it.
Tonda, what do you think? Because we have heard the government out defending this proposal this week, talking about affordability, talking about moving people from heating oil, getting heat pumps installed, and the Prime Minister as well, notably saying, look, there's not going to be any more carve-outs, there's not going to be any more pauses. We did hear Chrystia Freeland say that again in her news conference. What do you think about how the government has been trying to push back against all this criticism?
I think that they have a fundamental problem because there is incoherence on a number of levels in their rollout of it and their decision to go this route. They conflated their environmental policy and their challenge on cost of living and affordability issues. And so they tried to somehow marry the two, and near the twain shall meet because that was their platform to campaign on carbon pricing. And now that they've allowed a little wedge in there, of course their critics are coming after them. The other incoherence in it is that if it was, and it is actually, an offer on, you know, the delayed tax on home heating oil and the help for on the heat pumps, establishing heat pumps. These are on offer to all of Canada, and the benefit for the increased rebate for rural residents is available to all rural residents who who are in this category. But the problem is they stood up a bunch of Atlantic Canadian MPs behind them, not rural MPs. Mind you, they don't have a whole lot outside of Atlantic Canada. But I think that, if the political marketing brains over at the PMO had thought this through, they would have seen those incoherences. Tactically, it's a problem. It's not just a comms problem. It's also electorally, in a couple of years' time when people come back to go to the polls, now Atlantic Canada knows exactly how hard they're going to get hit. And so it's essentially a vote for, Liberals will have to campaign on vote for me, and you definitely will get hit in a year. So I think that incoherence doesn't leave them much space now to defend it as a policy. They're struggling to defend it, and they're meeting all the critics that Bob has pointed out. And the bigger challenge, I think, now is that if they try to address the concerns that have been raised, they risk losing some of their own people inside. Stephen Guilbeault has said this week that there will be no more carve-outs as long as I'm Environment Minister. So will he quit if they try to address some of these concerns? That's a big question.
Joanna, what do you think about the politics of this? Because we're talking about kind of the internal situation within the Liberal Party, but we've also got this Conservative motion calling for an exemption on all home heating from carbon pricing. Of course, the Bloc saying, look, this motion doesn't apply to Quebec. We have our own plans, so we're not concerned about it. But of course, we have the NDP coming out saying, the NDP yesterday saying, notably, that they're going to be in line with the Conservatives on this, which you wouldn't necessarily expect on an environmental issue. But what's the significance here of the New Democrats who have that agreement with the Liberals saying, look, we are going to be voting with them on this carbon pricing issue?
I think it's significant, and it's a shifting of perception of alliances in the House, not in any substantial way, to be clear. Like, I do not believe for a second that agreement is in doubt at this point. I think it benefits both the Liberals and the NDP to head off an election that the Liberals would likely lose and the NDP is unlikely to win. But to have Peter Julian come out and say that it's only be the adult in the room, that Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre had put forward a reasonable motion, NDP having characterized earlier ones as unreasonable. It's allowing the NDP's greatest dance partner in the House of Commons to essentially come out and chastise the Liberals for playing too hard with politics in a messy and incoherent way, and make Poilievre look like a statesman, right? So.
And speaking of Pierre Poilievre, Bob, he's obviously been targeting specific Liberal MPs on social media.
And NDP MPs as well.
And NDP MPs, especially in Northern Ontario, places like Sudbury, North Bay, Thunder Bay. And now we've also got, you talked about the pressure from Western Premiers, Ontario Premier Doug Ford, telling Ontario Liberal MPs, look at what your Atlanta colleagues have done for their residents. Are you going to do the same? So the Liberal caucus really under pressure here from a number of fronts.
Well, look, I mean, that's the problem with this policy. They've opened the door, and now everybody's saying, well, what about me? Because in Western Canada, they don't have a lot of home heating oil. They do in Northern Ontario, but not in Western Canada because it's mainly natural gas. So people or in the major cities, it's natural gas, and people are going to be saying, look, the most polluting greenhouse gas emitter is home heating oil. And you've given Atlantic Canadians a break for very electoral reasons. What about me? I don't see a way out for the government out of this. I just don't see a way that they can get out of this.
It would be interesting to know to what extent they had discussions inside when they were trying to figure out how do you balance the affordability concern with the environmental policy that's their plank, carbon pricing. How they balance, why not increase the rebates, simply increase the carbon levy rebate for the people who consume home heating oil, and then it's an affordability measure. Were they concerned that was going to be too inflationary, pumping more money into the economy than at a time it shouldn't? But they did that with the so-called grocery rebate, which was really a GST credit increase for low-income households. Why didn't they help households they felt were hit on the affordability issue in that way, as opposed to starting to chip away at their centerpiece environmental plank. That is still a mystery, and I'd love to know
Yeah,
sort
I mean,
of
a
that
carbon
discussion.
tax has to be universal. It has to be across the country. It can't be, if it's going to be serious, you can't start doing carve-outs, and that's the problem they have, and that's why they're running into pretty serious problems with the environmentalists in this movement, but also a lot of people in the Liberal Party who actually believe in this. And there's no win for this government on this. I mean, to Tonda's point, where was their thinking in the Prime Minister's office that they came up with this idea?
Okay, we have a moment left, Joanna. I want to bring you in and close with you because the Toronto Star does have some new polling numbers from Abacus data. The Conservatives still in a lead nationally, and with Pierre Poilievre personally ahead of Justin Trudeau on economic policy and foreign policy. So it does go back to that affordability versus environment question, especially because we are awaiting that fall fiscal update.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly people want to change. The Liberals look like they're in chaos. I think zooming out a little bit, if you think about where this government is in its life cycle, could have had a choice to dig in on these longer-term things that, short-term pain, longer-term gain, which is what a carbon pricing program is. But to me, this backsliding makes it look like they still think they have a chance, and they're trying to save the furniture. And it's looking really bad. I
would just point, we actually have more data to roll out this weekend from that poll. That's super interesting, and I urge everyone to read it because actually it speaks to the fact that they might be at a tipping point. There may not be a comeback path for the Liberals, not just under Justin Trudeau. Even if he were to leave, they now have big problems. So I'd encourage people to take a peek at that because it's very telling.
All right, Tonda, Joanna, and Bob, thanks as always.
Thank you.